All right, all right. I think we got everything live. Let me make sure. All the streams are up and all the audio is working. Yeah, I know some people wanted to do. I see some people are disappointed it's not a debate night. I apologize, guys. A lot of people have been asking. I mean, a lot of people have been asking me to do some Q&A. Hold on, actually, I got to change my background. Give me a second. Asking me to do Q&As more often. And so I think Q&As are a good idea. So I'm certainly not opposed to it. And the reason why I'm doing the Q&A on the nights that I'm hosting AXP is because it's already short, right? So I'm already spending my time debating people on AXP. And I spent all morning debating on the Unapologetic channel, right? So I spent 4 hours debating on Unapologetic in the morning. I just spent, 2 hours or more debating on AXP. So I've already spent 6.5 hours debating today. So after AXP ends, I think it's a kind of a nice break to just chill with the crew and do some question and answer. Does that make sense, guys? Does that make sense to you? At a certain point, right? You can only debate. You can only debate so much before your brain is like starting to exit debate mode, if you know what I mean. So that's kind of the rationale behind using the Sunday nights after AXP to do the Q&A, because they don't have to go very long. When we run out of questions, we're out of questions. That's just the end of it, right? And then, it's a good way to end out today. But Paul, holy shit, welcome to the Kraken Crew Elite. Big W, Paul. I appreciate that. And remember, anyone who is subscribed to the Kraken Crew Elite has access to the Deconstruction Zone cheat sheet. And I did add 2 new tabs to the Deconstruction Zone cheat sheet this week. So if you go to the cheat sheet, there should be 2 tabs. One of them is called Empty Tomb 1 Trip, and the other is called Empty Tomb 2 Trips, because it's a harmonization of the 4 Gospels on the empty tomb narrative. Of course, there's no real way to harmonize it. So I've got one harmonization with 1 trip of the women and one with 2 trips. There's a third option where they make 3 trips, by the way. And I believe Answers in Genesis posited this particular harmonization at one point. I'm working on that. I'm going to add that to it. But literally, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 trips, none of them can actually be harmonized. So, but anyways, check out that. And I've got the contradictory timeline of the Passover on another tab. So, and Kinto, welcome to the Kraken Crew Elite. I appreciate you joining the club. And guys, I think finally this week, I think we not only did we crack 1,000 members on YouTube, I think we're just over 1,100 members on YouTube. So big W for everyone who either became a member this week or gifted a membership. We totally appreciate it. And any support for the channel is greatly appreciated. And Jay Cow, good to see you tonight. Thank you so much, Jay Cow, for the $5 super chat. Jay Cow says, your knowledge is priceless. Hail Justin the Great. I don't know if I am great, but I try to study as much as humanly possible, and I'm trying to get better, every week. So thank you so much, Jay Cow, for liking the stream and so supporting. We really appreciate that. And Jim Nasty K-Bitch, good to see you. I think you were just over with us on AXP, but Jim Nasty says, just got a NRSV Catholic Bible to go through along with the cheat sheet. How reliable is that particular translation? Well, the NRSV, I assume it's the non-updated edition. I don't know which edition you got. If it's just a Catholic Bible but not a study Bible, then it might be the NRSV UE, the updated edition. If not, it's fine. So I've got like a blue Catholic Bible that doesn't have the updated edition. Both of them are good. So is it dependable? Is it reliable? Absolutely it is. And is it perfect? No, it's not. There's no such thing as a perfect translation. But to answer the question, the reason why so many scholars tell you to get the NRSV and becoming more popular is the NABRE. That's a really popular translation. But the reason why these translations are so popular in scholarship is because the translation method that's being used is a scholarly method, right? So they're going into the translation and they're asking themselves, what do these words mean? And they're doing that translation and then saying, okay, we know what these words means. We're giving you the translation. The theology, we don't care. We're not here to do theology. We're here to do a translation, right? And so what they're attempting to do is translate the text without reading theology into the translation, which is something like the NIV does it, the ESV does it, where when they translate the text, they're trying to preserve certain parts of the theology. The King James does it too. The King James is horrific at it. The King James chose to leave Lucifer in Isaiah 14 rather than just translating Hillel as a light bearer or light bringer, whichever one you want to use it as, right? Because when they did the translation of the King James Bible, they thought to themselves, we need to make sure that people know that Isaiah 14 is actually about Satan. And they know it. They know the name Lucifer because, for the last 1,100 years, the text was in Latin, and they knew Lucifer in Latin was their idea of Satan, according to Isaiah 14. So they left Lucifer in there. It was not an honest translation of the text. The NRSV doesn't do any of that garbage. They're not gaslighting anybody. They're not interpreting the text for you. They're saying, here's the translation, make what you will of it. And that's why we love the NRSV so much. But again, I would also suggest, let me show you a different Bible. There are a couple editions of the Catholic Study Bible, and they typically use a New American Bible revision. The third edition is the one you want. It's put out by Oxford. It's the Catholic Study Bible. You want the third edition. And the study notes in here are excellent. The second way that you can get this study Bible is you can get what's called the Catholic note-taking study Bible. It's not a hardcover like this one is. You guys know I love hardcovers here because I'm rock hard for Doug. But it's not a hardcover, but the Catholic note-taking Bible has the same translation, the same great study notes, but it's got a slightly different layout, and the pages are thicker. So you can write in it, and it doesn't bleed through as much, and the pages don't have as much bleed through. Like on this one, you can kind of see some of the text bleeding through from the other side. The Catholic note-taking Bible doesn't really have that problem. But anyways, if you don't want to write in your Bible and you just want the study notes from the Catholic note-taking Bible and you want something that's in the New American Bible Revised Edition, then just spend like $30 and go out and get a Catholic Study Bible. You're going to love that translation, and you're going to love the study notes in it. They're done by Catholic scholars, but they're not doing Catholic doctrine, right? They're just doing Catholic scholarship, much like the New Oxford Annotated Bible. Although to be fair, a lot of these ecumenical study Bibles have Catholic scholars on the list. Like there are non-Protestants that work on the New Oxford Annotated Study Bible. It's just that the Catholic Study Bible is a Catholic scholarly work. And Randy gifting out 5 Deconstruction Zone memberships. Big W, Randy. I really appreciate the generosity. And anyone who gets gifted a membership to the Kraken Crew Elite has access to the cheat sheet. We've got contradictions on the cheat sheet. We've got resources for arguing against the prophecies. We've got resources for arguing against the LDS church claims. We're up to now like 65 contradictions that are in the Bible that you can appeal to. Some of them quite large, some of them not so much. I also added, guys, by the way, if you go to the tab on the Deconstruction cheat sheet labeled Apocrypha, at the bottom of that page, I added a new link. And the link goes to a document that I put together. And the document that I put together is friggin' exhaustive. I'm going to show it to you. I did this a week or two ago, and I really think you're going to like it. I put a document together that shows all of the quotations of the apocryphal works among the church fathers. And then I sectioned the document out by who said it. So we've got the early writings of the apostles, theoretically like the Didache, Epistle of Barnabas, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Polycarp, Clement, Tertullian. If you want to see how the church fathers used the apocrypha, what most Protestants say aren't scripture, how they used it as scripture for the first 400 years of the church, this document is going to get you there. I love this document. It's a great document. You can see all the church fathers literally quoting from the Apocrypha saying that this is prophecy from God. It's scripture. It's inspired by the Holy Spirit, because the Apocrypha was part of the Christian canon. It is canon. The Catholics and the Orthodox got it right. The Protestants fucked it up. They screwed the pooch. And Silver Surfer, thank you for the $3.99. Thank you, Hippo. I appreciate that. Big W. And Epicurious of Samos, thank you so much for the super chat. It says, Doug the Rock has called Justin to spread his message around the world so that Doug doesn't have to condemn the world. It makes sense. Save the few. Well, listen, Epicurious, Doug doesn't actually condemn the world. He won't harm a single individual for not believing in him. He's not like Yahweh. He does not harm anybody. He is a pacifist. Doug believes that the only stoning that should be happening is the kind that happens on 420. That's the only stoning that is officially sanctioned by Doug. So get elevated and rock hard for Doug, friends, but only if it's legal where you live. Absolutely. Don't get rock hard and stoned for Doug if it's illegal where you live. So that being said, question from Ken. Ken says, have you read neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky's Determined or watched his lecture on biology and religiosity? It's on YouTube. I actually haven't, Ken. Now I kind of want to. Let me put it up in my browser. Maybe tonight when I'm like getting ready to hit the hay, I can watch some of it and get updated. Sapolsky. Okay. I assume this is on the science of determinism. If I had to guess, I don't really know, but let me take a look at it, what it says. Yeah, the science of free will. Okay. I may have actually seen some of his lectures on YouTube and not realized it was of him, because I do kind of recognize his face. Let me see his bio. Blah, 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 blah. So he does have a bio. It says, the author of several works of nonfiction, including Primate's Memoir, The Trouble of Testosterone, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, from Stanford. I knew I recognized him. Okay, yeah. So I ran into this guy because he was doing lectures at Stanford. And he is on, remember, I think they still do it. There used to be this thing called iTunes University. You guys remember iTunes University? What they did is they had all these classes you can get. Like you can go and do Christine Hayes's class on the Old Testament, or you can go and watch an MIT class on robotics, or they had classes from Stanford. They had a lot of stuff from Stanford. And this is when I ran into Robert, but I don't think I recalled his name. It's probably been 10 years since I've watched it. And iTunes University is not really a thing anymore, but I didn't know that he wrote a book about this topic. So now I really want to read the book. It looks like it's new. It came out in 2023. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add it to my reading list, and it's now in my to-do list. So I appreciate the suggestion. It looks like he's got a couple other books too, like Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst. Another really interesting looking book that came out in 2018. So Ken, thank you so much for the suggestion. I'll definitely give that a look. And Flanker420, thank you so much for the super chat. It says, what is the biggest hurdle to making the world more secular? Education, access to information, messaging, community, etc. Good question. I mean, I think all those are hurdles. Here's what I think. I think my personal opinion, I think education is probably the most important thing that's holding secularism back, right? So like if religion is dependent on a lack of information, then I would say secularism thrives when you have information. I think that's why, of course, as we as society gains more information, gains more knowledge about the natural world, that's why they become more secular, is because the information doesn't seem to support the God hypothesis, right? If the God hypothesis was more well supported, we would expect that as we learned more about the natural world, we would find more and more evidence leading to God. When in fact, we don't find that. We don't find evidence that is leading to God. We find more and more evidence leading away from God, which is unfortunate that so many people, in spite of all the evidence, is willing to say that there's still a God. They want to do the God of the gaps. But is messaging inhibiting that? I think so. I think we're turning the tide, and I think shows like the Atheist Experience and The Line, and I think these open platforms like TikTok and YouTube that allow us to have these public debates, I think these are really good forms of messaging and information, because it allows just normal Joes to come into contact with information and arguments that they've never heard of. And when they come into contact with new information, sometimes they change their minds and sometimes not. But I think the debate space is a good space to have these discussions, especially because when you're debating somebody, the other person wants to present the best argument in favor of their position, and you want to present the best argument in favor of your position, which means both parties are then going to reach as deep as they can into the subject to defend their positions, rather than giving a shallow assessment of their position. So that's the one thing I love about the debate space, is because there seems to be like the personalities in the debate space don't want to be proven wrong. It kind of forces them to reach deep into their topics to find the best arguments for their positions, which means that the viewers are typically getting an argument that is presenting new information. But thank you so much for the super chat. And Rory in the house, good to see you, Rory. Rory says, the Doug abides. Was Lilith the first female human created with Adam in Torah? And if so, why leave her out of the Old Testament? Any chance to call in with QA? So I'll tell you the reason why I didn't structure this as a call-in is because inevitably, if I open a guest box, people are going to get up here and they're going to be offended that I won't debate them. Everywhere I go online where guests are allowed, people know me as the debate guy, and people stalk me and follow me around and demand that I debate them on the spot, or else I am a coward. Despite the fact that I spend literally 20 hours a week debating online, and they could have came any of those 20 hours. So the reason why I structured the Q&A to not have a guest box is just to kind of eliminate the goofballs that just want to come in and debate. And also because sometimes people, like friendly people, friends of mine, want to come in, not friends of mine, but friends of the channel want to come in and ask questions. And it's difficult to find an endpoint because one person could then be up there for an hour. And I want to answer as many questions as possible and not get stuck on a long diatribe with somebody where we end up spending an hour trying to answer one question. So that's kind of why I structured the Q&A the way that I have. It's possible that this isn't the best way to do it, but this is kind of the way I figured it would make the most sense. And maybe it doesn't make the most sense. Maybe down the road I'll change it. But anyways, Rory does have a question, though. It says, was Lilith the first female created? And I don't believe so, but there is an important Bible passage. I'm going to take you real quick to Isaiah 34, and not in the NIV. I'm going to take you in the NRSV. This is really the only passage in the Bible where Lilith makes an appearance. So when we say, like, was Lilith created alongside Adam? In Judaism, the answer is technically no, not really, right? But that being said, if you go to, was it verse 4 am I thinking of? Where does she, or 14 maybe? Yeah, 14, not 4. Okay. So in later Jewish mythology, they developed this idea of Lilith, but she wasn't in early Jewish mythology. But we get a list of like desert demons in Isaiah 34. And this is a great thing about Isaiah, guys. Go to Isaiah and just read Isaiah and look up all of the gods and the demons that are referenced in Isaiah, and you'll quickly figure out that Isaiah was very keen, very aware of the literature from the ancient Near East, very aware. And this is one of the passages that really shines, that really tells you how educated Isaiah was, because he's listing now mythology that is very, very reminiscent of what we find in the other ancient Near Eastern texts. But anyways, we get in the list of these demons and other deities, we get one in verse 14, and it says, "Wild cats shall meet with hyenas, goat demons shall call to each other. There also Lilith shall repose and find a place to rest." Now, some translations will translate Lilith as screech owl, but that's not what is actually in the text. It appears that this is an actual reference to Lilith, the goddess that we know of, if you want to call her a goddess or a demon. And she's associated with the owl because she's kind of pictured that way in ancient Near Eastern mythology, because she'll swoop in the night and steal the life of a child that's in utero, right? And she's also, it's interesting, she's associated as kind of a night demon, which is interesting because the word for night or nighttime is typically some variant of Lili or Lilith, or there's various spellings of it. So her name is similar to the Hebrew word for nighttime. It's not identical. And so, and because of the way she shows up in mythology, she kind of now has these characteristics as like being a bird of the night that flies in and snatches the life of the young one because she's bitter over certain things. But you can read about the backstory of Lilith in a bunch of ancient Near Eastern texts. Let me see if I wrote any of them down. I sent a whole thing to somebody a couple months ago on Lilith, and I don't think I actually saved it, so I apologize. So I guess I can't really show you what I was going to show you. But anyways, I'll add it to the document. To the cheat sheet. I'll add the documentation there for some of these deities. I've been meaning to give a page of references of like, here are various deities and here are the documents from the ancient world where they show up that you can read about them. I'll start working on getting that added to the deconstruction cheat sheet so we can all have a whack at that. But to answer the question, Rory, the idea that Lilith was originally there with Adam is something that was really developed in like the Kabbalistic period and wasn't part of standard Jewish mythology. That came much later. So, but I appreciate the question. And words don't mean words. Amazing name as always. Thank you for the super chat. It says Oxford Bible Commentary, first edition, Jewish New Testament. Well, I don't know if I know the question you're asking. Are you asking which one should you get? I apologize. I'm trying to understand what you're saying here, but I'm not really sure I understand what you're saying here. But the Oxford Bible Commentary is good. In fact, I've got a copy of it here. So, like, if you have a Bible that you like already, and you're like, well, shit, I just want like a simple commentary. Well, like academic commentaries are not single volume commentaries. There's hundreds of them, and quite typically they're exhaustive. So, for example, my commentary on Genesis from the Continental Commentary series is 3 volumes just on Genesis. But you can get a single volume commentary on the Bible. It's thick. It's a big boy. It would be very concise, and it won't address every passage, but it'll address a lot of the passages. And this is one of my favorites. This is the Oxford Bible Commentary, and it's a very, very, very good commentary. And you can get it online. What's this one sell for? Does it have a price? I don't know what it sells for, but you can get them online pretty easy. I don't know what they cost nowadays. Mine is the 3rd edition. If you're going to get the Oxford Bible Commentary, get something the 3rd edition. Don't get like a 1st edition. I've seen the first edition. It's not nearly as good. It's very pared down, so I wouldn't get the first edition. But the Oxford Bible Commentary is a great commentary. I do recommend it. Same thing with the Jerome Bible Commentary. I think those are my two favorite single volume commentary series. After that, it's all going to be, 30, 40, 50 volume sets. Gary, thank you for the super chat. Big W on the 666. Hail Nero. It says, Hail Doug, whenever we need a miracle, he is the only one we can count to grant it. That's amazing play on words. Only Doug can give you the miracle. He alone can grant it. Always remember that Doug is rock hard for you. Even in your most flaccid days, Doug is always rock hard. And Superhuman Theory, thank you for the super chat, friend. He says, curious if you saw the debate between Alex O'Connor and David Wood. Also, would love to hear your own thoughts on if Jesus claimed to be God. Thanks. It's a really good question. So I've only seen part of the debate, and I'm a little bit torn on whether or not Jesus claimed to be God. I also think it's a useless question. So this is kind of the thing that bothers me with the current line of debates, is theists have now discovered that they will never prove their religion to be true. So they have to do dumb ancillary debates, like, is Christianity good for society? Or did Jesus really claim to be God? To me, these are dumb concepts. I care about whether or not the religions are actually true. I could be wrong. That being said, there are some passages in the New Testament that would lead you to believe that Jesus thought himself as God, or at least equal to God. And I think Psalm 110 is maybe the most clear of them. Psalm 110, he basically intimates that David, speaking in the Spirit, calls the Messiah Lord in the same way that Yahweh is Lord. And Jesus is likening himself to being the Messiah. Well, shit, if that's the case, if Jesus is suggesting that he's as much Lord as the Lord is Lord, then it seems to be like he's making a God claim. That being said, the Bible's not universally clear on this. Like, there's passages that would make you think that the Gospels are an adoptionist viewpoint, and you would go to the earliest gospel like Mark. Mark appears to be an adoptionist framework, where at his baptism, he's adopted as the Son of God, just like it was said of David, today, you are my son. It's an adopted sonship, right? The problem is there's no univocality in the New Testament to tell you, did Jesus actually think he was God, or did he think he was equal to God, or did he think he was the Son of God? You can pull any number of strings and come up with a different opinion, which is, I think, is what makes the question so difficult to answer, because you have to ask yourself, well, which Jesus? We've got multiple Jesuses in the New Testament, and they don't all agree. And the writings of Paul sure as hell don't agree on what the Gospels say about Jesus, right? So anyways, that's kind of how I feel about it. If you pinned me down right now and said, give me an answer, did Jesus believe he was God, assuming that all the texts of the Gospels are true texts, I mean, they were all spoken by Jesus, then I would have to conclude at a bare minimum that Jesus did believe that he was at least equal to God. How he got to that position, I don't know if the text is clear, right? It could be adoptionist, it could be co-eternal, could be any number of things, but he does seem to be placing himself on the same level as God. That's my opinion. I could be wrong on that. This is not a topic that I'm heavily invested in, but I think that's my favorite reading of it. Thank you for the question, though. And Ray, thank you for the super chat. It says, you said that despite there being no evidence for them, there are some God concepts that make logical sense. For you, which are those? So, yeah, my suggestion is, like, the gods that we talk about typically always have straight up contradictions in them, right? Like, there are, like, the omni properties of God are just contradictory. The Trinity is just contradictory. Now, we could say that there is a God that is logically coherent, and I think that God is typically like a deistic God, which is one step above just like a natural force that poofed everything into existence. I don't know if that God is logically inconsistent. And I don't know how we square that with time, because there's a couple ways to say that. We could say, like, well, before anything existed, there was just this God, but then we have to assume that it was pre-existent with time, meaning time must somehow be an attribute of the deistic God. Like, time must emerge from the God somehow for it to be logically coherent. But there's not necessarily just a straight up P and not P in saying that the reason why we have something is because of a deistic God or like a demiurge. So that's kind of what I'm suggesting there. But that being said, even if it doesn't present a logical contradiction, there's still no proof for the damn thing, and there's no necessity for it. There's no reason why it needs to exist. It doesn't answer any questions that can't be answered without it already having a naturalistic answer. So to me, even if it's logically coherent, it's still unnecessary. You know what I mean? So that's what I would say to that. Let me grab the next question. I appreciate the question, though. Thank you so much. And Acme Hero, good to see you, Acme Hero. Acme says, the Open University, Google them, has accessible free classes, videos, and audio clips about science, including biology and evolution. Great resource, in my opinion. I don't know about the Open University. I do know that the episodes from iTunes University are still available. You can still get them. But I didn't know anything about the Open University. Now I'm saving it in my browser. Give me just like 1 second. All right, I just saved it. Now I know about the Open University, and I'll probably be checking out some of the classes this week. I really appreciate the resource. The thing that I loved about iTunes University is they were basically just giving you video of the actual professors at the major universities. Like, you were getting lectures from Oxford and MIT and Stanford and Harvard. So you're getting lectures from the best of the best, which I really appreciated. And so if you have access to iTunes U, definitely get some of those episodes. But thanks so much, Acme. And Eric, thank you so much for the question. He says, I enjoy your channel. I always wondered what attributes entitled Noah to be called a righteous man. So that's the question I have, right? So we're told that Noah was a righteous man, right? And that was the reason why he was saved. And of course, his unrighteous son, Ham, was saved alongside of him because God, for some reason, saves the family members of good people, even though they're not good. He will save the wicked, even though he should be wiping them out, which is weird that he's that picky and choosy. You know what I mean? But anyways, we're not really told about the righteous attributes of Noah other than that he was righteous. And in fact, he's referred to as Tom in the Hebrew text, where it says that he was blameless, meaning he's without blemish, just like the animals that got sacrificed. So the weird thing is, the first thing that Noah does, excuse me, long day. The weird thing that Noah does, the first thing he does after the flood is the dude gets drunk. So drunk that he passes out. And we know from the rest of the Bible that you're not supposed to get drunk like that, right? So we kind of have to like ask ourselves, if God knows the past, present, and future, and he knows that righteousness of Noah is perfect, is without blemish, then like it's really weird that like we have a depiction of Noah getting drunk right away. Was he that righteous? Or is getting drunk not that bad of a thing? Or did God mean, well, he's righteous for now, he's going to do some shit later? It's a weird situation. You know what I mean, Eric? I get you. We're not really told why he's righteous. Although the narrative might lead you to believe that he's righteous because he serves God. Of course, he's giving sacrifices to God. He's obedient to God. So I guess that's probably the best we could make of it. And Otto, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate that. He says, in Isaiah 40:22, does the word chag refer to the horizon or the entire earth as a flat disk? Seems more about the horizon, not the earth shape, in my opinion. So this has actually been a pretty big debate by the way. You're not the only one that picked up on this. So in Isaiah 40, there's always been some ongoing discussion on what the hell is happening with the Hebrew word chag. It's not a hate, it's a chet at the beginning of the word, so you have to really get it deep down in the throat. You know what I mean? But in Isaiah 40:22, I'll put it on the screen for those who aren't familiar with it. It says, "He who sits above the circle of the earth and inhabits it, and its inhabitants." Shit, I got to start over. "It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to live in." Now, my interpretation of this, and I think it actually agrees with the New Oxford. Let me see what New Oxford says. But my interpretation of this is referring to the firmament, right? And I'll lay that out here in a second, right? So if you go to the New Oxford Annotated Study Bible, it says blah, 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 blah. Isaiah 40:22. It says a rhetorical recapitulation, blah, blah, blah. The language in which the cosmos is here is described would be compared to Genesis 1, verses 1 through 31, and then they don't actually address it. So it must have been a different study Bible I was reading from. Maybe the Catholic Study Bible was the one that made a note on that. But so here's why I think the circle of the earth is actually referring to the dome over top of the earth, right? Because look at the viewpoint, look at the vantage point that's being given, right? He's saying he sits above the circle of the earth. Now, according to Psalm 150, verse 1, where is God's location, right? So if you go to Psalm 150, it says, "Praise the Lord, praise God in his sanctuary, praise him in his mighty firmament." We get this picture that God is got a throne just on top of the firmament. And we see this again in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 1, and also in chapter 10, where he's taken up in a vision, and then he sees, let's see, there we go, the throne of God just on the other side of the dome. And on the bottom side of the dome sees the living creatures. Over the heads of the living creatures, there was something like a dome. That's the rakia, that's the firmament, shining like crystal, spread out above their heads. And then he describes God's throne room as being just above the dome, right? So we get a pretty coherent picture in the Old Testament of God's throne room being just on the upper side of the firmament. And in fact, in the Jewish writings, let me grab one for you, they even describe how it is that God's throne is on top of the firmament, because it's weird. If the firmament separated the waters above and the waters below, how is God's throne in the middle of the waters above? We got a problem, right? And so the Jewish rabbis posited a fix for this. Not only did they posit how thick they thought the throne or the firmament was, but they said there's actually a thickness above the water between the firmament, which is an air pocket, right? And we can find this in the Jerusalem Talmud and also in the standard Talmudic writings. There's a couple descriptions of God's throne and of the firmament. In fact, I'll put these on the cheat sheet tonight for everybody. I'll put the rabbinic writings of the firmament in there. But let's see now. Let me see. In Jerusalem Talmud, blah, 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 blah. God made the firmament and he divided between the waters and the blah, 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 blah. There we go. He says, "I would have said that the upper waters rest directly upon the firmament." Let me put this on the screen so you guys can see this real quick. Otto, I'm going to bump you down. Okay. Let's see. Can I make the text bigger? I don't know if I can make the text bigger when I zoom in because it's a text file. But it says, "I would have said that that the upper waters rest directly upon the firmament. But since it says, and the waters were above the firmament in Genesis 1:7, that indicates that the upper waters are suspended above the firmament by the word of God." So they're saying, no. The upper waters are actually not touching the firmament. They're above the firmament. And then this comes in to describe how it is that there's an air pocket for God to live in, right? Let me find that quote. Blah, 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 blah. It should be in this document that I put together some time ago. Actually, maybe I should do a word search on my own document and see where in the heck that quote came from in here. All right. Let's see. It is in here. I apologize. I didn't come with a quote ready to quote, but I know it's in this document because I put this document together at some point. So I know it's in it. Oh boy. But anyways, if it's not actually in this, there we go. If it's not actually in this document, I must have put it in a different document, which I'll add to the cheat sheet later, and I'll apologize. And then you'll have the answer about how God's throne is in the firmament. Blah, 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 blah. God said, let there be a firmament. Yeah, it illuminates. Yeah, okay. Yeah, actually, I didn't include the quotation I was thinking of in this particular document. I apologize. These are all quotations about the thickness of the firmament and not actually describing how it is that God lives up there in the firmament, if in fact there was a bunch of water up there. So I must have not put it on this document, but I know I've got a document where I documented it somewhere. I'll have to pull it out later, so I apologize for that one. But the fact of the matter is, God's throne was above the firmament, which is why all this going back to Isaiah 40, verse 22. There we go. Where it says, he who sits above the circle of the earth and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain. So the Hebrew word that we have here could mean disc. It could mean circle. If it's a disc, it's referring to the earth. If it's a circle, it's possibly referring to either the horizon or the firmament. I think it's referring to the firmament because it's referring to sitting above it and looking down, which is how God is always described when it talks about him being in the firmament. And then it also describes the heavens, right? It says he spreads them out, the heavens, like a tent to live in, which is another description of the firmament. The firmament is described as containing the stars and the other bodies, like a tent over the earth, right? So the language in Isaiah 40, verse 22, is just, it's so reminiscent of everything else the Bible says about God's throne being above the firmament that I'm kind of inclined to believe that they're intimating that the word chag is referring to the arc of the firmament, not necessarily the circle of the earth, and certainly not the horizon. They had no idea what the horizon was. They thought the horizon was the edge of the earth, so it wouldn't make any sense to put horizon in there when they had no concept of the horizon. I'm looking at the Catholic Study Bible, and the Catholic Study Bible doesn't have a study note on it either. So it must be in another resource that I had where they were talking about this. But that's a long answer to a short question. I apologize if I drug that out a little bit, but I wanted to give it thorough treatment. It's a good question. And Acme Hero, thank you for gifting 5 Deconstruction Zone memberships. I really appreciate that. That's very generous, Acme. And Dex with 5-cent subbies as well. Thank you so much for sending out 5 DZ memberships. Everyone who has a DZ membership at the Kraken Crew Elite level has access to the emojis and to the cheat sheet. Now, some people are saying, I don't give a shit about that cheat sheet. Well, if you don't care about the cheat sheet, but you want to get the emojis, just get the bottom tier membership, and bada bing, bada boom, you got your emojis. And we added 2 new emojis last week. We added the dodgeball emoji and the Hebrew hymen emoji for when people are defending Deuteronomy 22. Adele, thank you for the super chat. Adele says, ordered the Martyr's Mirror after listening to an old live of yours. What a bloody theater. Amazing, amazing reference. So For those who don't know, the Martyr's Mirror originally had a different name. It went by the Bloody Theater. That's what they named it. They renamed it because it was a little bit too graphic of a title, and they renamed it the Martyr's Mirror. Now, for those of you who don't know, I love primary resources. I have a library full of ancient documents, ancient texts, ancient tablets, because I think studying the primary resources will always be superior than studying somebody telling you what the primary resources are telling you. The Martyr's Mirror is a book that documents in primary resources everything that was happening to the Anabaptists all the way from Constantine, how the church was murdering, pillaging, killing, and tracking down heretics for the mere crime of baptizing people as adults and violating the tenets and the rules of the Catholic Church. That's all they were doing, was baptizing each other as adults. And there's one group that no one ever talks about. There's a group called the Waldenses, and they were huge. Hundreds of thousands of people were part of the Waldens heresy. And the reason why you've never heard of the Waldens is because they killed them. They're all gone. The church, not just the Catholics, also Protestants, murdered all of them, issued decrees literally saying, don't just track these heretics down and kill them, kill their family members, kill the people that are giving them housing, kill their friends, anybody who associates with these heretics, kill them, track them down. And if you incur criminal charges in process of getting these people, your criminal charges will be pardoned. Holy shit. There were other edicts that were issued. You can see all this in the Bloody Mirror. It's all there. The Bloody Theater, it's all in there. There's other edicts that literally state, if you go and kill these heretics, you get to possess their property. You can go kill these heretics and get part of their property as your reward for executing these heretics. Listen, the Catholics and the Protestants and the rest of Christian history is a bloody fucking theater because they were killing anybody who disagreed with them. So the Christianity didn't bring daisies and roses to the world. Actually, Noah in our chat knows about the Waldenses, actually, because she was from the Mennonite lineage, which the Waldenses were kind of a precursor to the early Anabaptists, which gave rise to the Mennonites. And she says, actually, we learned about the Waldenses in school. And you did, because you actually went to a school and were part of a tradition that taught about the Anabaptist martyrs. And good on you for learning some history a lot of people don't know about. Angela, thank you so much for the super chat. It says, Hail Dog, does the cheat sheet talk about gays? It does not. Not that, I mean, the passages about homosexuality appear there. They're in the cheat sheet as part of like the worst bits of the Bible. But there's no like dialogue about them. I mean, obviously, Angela, you know my position. I think the Bible is anti-gay, anti-homosexuality, anti-trans, which is why you should take that thing out back and throw it away. Put it in your burn pit, light it on fire, and kiss it goodbye. The Bible demonizes people for being just normal people. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And Dexter, a 4-month member of the Crack and Crew Elite, Big W Dexter, says, Hail Doug, I'm out camping, being one with nature, and rock hounding remnants of Doug and Sharon, perhaps their children. Hope stream is going well. Well, Dex, it is going well, and thank you so much for being a member and supporting, and for being a pillar of our community, and for out there getting in tune with Doug. Doug appreciates that, and tell Doug and Sharon that we said hello. And Edward with the $10 super chat, thank you so much, says, what is the deal with Son of Man? Sometimes Jesus seems to be talking about a separate character, sometimes himself. What is the deal? So this is a topic that, I got to be honest, it doesn't get a lot of play. It doesn't get a lot of airtime. But here's what you need to know. So the Son of Man kind of originated starting with the 7th chapter of Daniel, we get this description of one like the Son of Man, who's also described as one who is like a son of God. So this really weird character, like what the heck is going on with this quasi God man, right? Now, anyone who knows Daniel well enough and is familiar with rabbinic writings knows that the God man is just the archangel Michael or possibly Gabriel. It's not the Messiah, but although some of them believed it was, I'm not saying that everyone believed that. But anyways, what happened was a whole mythology was built around this particular character, and it took on messianic overtones during the intertestamental period, primarily towards the end of the intertestamental period and in the Dead Sea period. And we start getting people kind of toying with this notion of a Messiah who is a God-man, right? And so we see some of the early signs of this showing up in 2nd Esdras, although I would say 2nd Esdras was probably written part of it before Jesus, part of it after Jesus, and we get some of it in the book of Enoch. Now listen to 1st Enoch 46 and ask yourself, does this sound anything like Jesus? Because it's going to sound a whole lot like Jesus, right? So it says, and there, I'm sorry, you probably can't read the text. Let me make it bigger so you guys can actually read it. And there I saw one whom belongs to the time before time, and his head was white like wool. With him was another being whose countenance had the appearance of a man. Interesting, right? And then he goes on, he says, he answered and said to me, this is the Son of Man. Oh, interesting. This is not just one like the Son of Man. This is the Son of Man who has righteousness, with whom dwells righteousness, and who reveals all the treasures of that which is hidden, because the Lord of the spirits has chosen him. So now we get this person who's called the Son of Man, in which the high God, Yahweh, has chosen him. Exactly what we read in Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel chapter 7, we read about a figure that is like a son of man, in which God gives all authority to. If you go down, it says, I saw one like a human being coming out of the clouds of heaven, and he came to the Ancient One who was presented before him, and to him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all people, nations, and language would serve him. So, interesting enough, we get a revision of Daniel chapter 7, or Daniel chapter 7 is tapping in to something that already existed in the culture of this idea of like some kind of a God man, and we're referring to the God man as the Son of Man. So it becomes a messianic title for what we read in Daniel chapter 7, and not just in the biblical sources, but in the extra biblical sources. So the long and short of it is, when Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, he's not saying that I'm human. He's referring to this interesting tradition that equates Daniel chapter 7 with this God-man figure that is going to receive all authority from the Father in heaven, which is why we see really interesting passages. Like in Mark chapter 2, Jesus is explaining what it means to be the Son of Man, and he's explaining how much authority does the Son of Man even have? Because when he heals the paralytic by forgiving his sins, he says, so you know that the Son of Man has the power to forgive sins. He's saying the Son of Man, the thing that you know and you come to expect to be the Messiah, has the authority to forgive sins. But in Mark chapter 7, if you go down to verse 26, 25-ish, he talks about the Son of Man again, and this referring to the Sabbath. He says, then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for humankind, and not humankind for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. He's saying himself, the Son of Man, is Lord even over the Sabbath. So he keeps talking about the Son of Man as a messianic title because in his time period, the Son of Man was a messianic title, but it originated from this weird Daniel narrative, it seems, or perhaps Daniel was riffing on Enoch. We don't fully know which one came first, Enoch 46 or Daniel chapter 7, but they could actually be from the same tradition. So I hope that answers your question. It was a great question. I appreciate it, and I know some of these answers are long-winded, but I want to give it some justice. I did write, if you're really interested in the Son of Man topic, I did write a blog article on this years ago, going into deeper detail. I'm more than happy to send you a link to the article that you can read, but that's the short answer to the question. Bruce, thank you for the super chat. Bruce says, I was curious how long it took you to become comfortable with being irreverent. The things you say now would have been considered blasphemous to you at one point. Thanks for all you do. Praise Doug. Thank you so much for the support, Bruce. And you're 100% right, actually. So there was a time in my life where for most of my life, I was very, very reverent. I never cussed. I never talked bad about people. Like, I was just incredibly reverent because I was taught to believe that, well, to be a good Christian, there are things you can and cannot do. And I wanted to be a good Christian. As I got older, I came to realize that, like, it's not just about being a good Christian. It's actually about being a good witness, right? If you want to convince people that Christianity is better than non-Christianity, you need to present yourself a particular way. And so I kind of came to the conclusion that I needed to present myself in a particular way in order to win souls. But the reality of it is, once you get past this threat of eternal damnation, you kind of figure out that, like, there's not really a good reason not to say fuckity fuck. I mean, it's a great word to say. I don't think you should say it around children. I don't think you should use that language around youngsters. But, like, when we're around full-grown adults, if you can't tolerate me saying shit, piss, cunt, fucker, cocksucker, motherfucker, then you're in the wrong room. You need to go find a different room, because there's nothing wrong with these words. It doesn't matter to me. Anyways, it took me a while to get to that point. It took me, probably 6 or 7 years to get to the point where I was comfortable cussing in public, just because it was so ingrained to not do that. And Rory, thank you for the super chat, says, your thoughts on Jesus as son and 12 disciples as Zodiac? So, listen, I don't believe in zodiac signs, and I don't think that Jesus did either. That being said, check this out. That being said, Jewish thought definitely pulled on a lot of Babylonian thought. So take a look at the Babylonian calendar. Hold on. So the Babylonian calendar and the Jewish calendar, as it turns out, are the same calendar. And what we find is that the Babylonians did heavily believe in the zodiac, right? And so we do find some remnants of zodiac type thinking in Jewish culture, only because they borrowed from the Babylonian culture. In fact, their scribes, a lot of them learned to write while they were in Babylon. That's where they learned to be scribes. That's how they were writing Genesis to polemicize the texts from Babylon. And so anyways, you can see, like, the names of the months in Akkadian. That's what the Babylonians spoke. And what their equivalent would have been in the other languages, like in Hebrew. So the month of Nisanu in Hebrew is just the month of Nisan. The month of Aru is just Ayar, and the month of Samanu is Sivan, and Tammuz is Tammuz. Tammuz is a deity. It's named after a deity, and Tammuz actually shows up in the Old Testament, actually. So we've got these remnants from Babylonia that do include the zodiac and even their numerical system, which is why we get, like, pairs of 12 show up in Jewish culture. So 12 had a significance only in that the numerical system used in the ancient Near East was base 60, and 12 was an important part of the base 60 system because you counted using the creases in your fingers. You didn't have calculators. You tabulated. We count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They tabulated using the creases and their thumb. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So there were 12 creases in the four fingers, which was how people tabulated numbers. And so the number 12 kind of became a significant number as the number of completion, because that's as high as you can count to on one hand. So that's why 12 is important. But then they also incorporated zodiac stuff to reinforce this idea of 12 being a number of completion. So the long and short of it is the woo-woo of Babylon made it in as kind of a remnant of archaic society in early Judaism. And that's why we have like emphasis on numbers like 12 and 7 and things like that. Hope that answers your question. It was a good question, actually. And we've got a super chat from Quinto. Thank you so much for the super chat. It says, what in your opinion is the best response to the argument that morality is objective and that it's grounded in the God of the Bible? Love your content. Praise the rock hard dog. Great question, Quinto. And here's how I would deal with this. So what Christians will want to do is come up and say, well, we know God is real because we have objective morals, and objective morals have to be grounded in something that is non-contingent, and therefore they're grounded in God because God is non-contingent. To me, this is question begging because they have no evidence that objective morals exist. They're saying objective morals exist because God exists, and God exists because objective morals exist. This is a circular. So what I would say is listen, I don't believe that objective morals exist. Now, listen, some of you, maybe you do believe objective morals exist. I don't. But my argument is this. If objective morals do exist, then it's up to you to prove that they do exist before I accept that they exist. And what I know from having this argument so many times is that they'll never be able to do it. There's not a single theist on the planet that can demonstrate that objective morals do actually exist. The best they can do is say dumb things like, well, you behave like they exist, which is bullshit. We don't. Or they can say, well, if they don't exist, then you can't tell me that I'm wrong for doing horrible X, Y, and Z, which is, again, a bullshit argument, because I could say it is my subjective opinion that what you're doing is wrong. I'm not appealing to objective morality. So the thing I would do is challenge them on premise number one. Challenge them on the idea that objective morals even exist, because they can't do it. They won't be able to do it. Now, if they deny, the argument, then it's still up to them to provide the support for their premise. And if they can't support their premise, they're likely to drop the argument and move on to something else. One of the arguments I probably presented. But that's how I deal with it. Hopefully that is enough to give you something to work with. There is a naturalistic argumentation for the grounding of morality. Ian at allegedly Ian, he provides an argument for grounding morality in a naturalistic way. I'm not very good at the argument, but I would say this. Here's what I would say. If we conclude that there is objective morals and it needs some kind of grounding, I could ground it in something that is metaphysically necessary for objective morals to exist, that isn't sentient, that isn't a God. I can just say that there is a metaphysical, objective moral law code that exists, and it exists because it's metaphysically necessary. The same argument that you're giving for your God. Your God only exists because your God is metaphysically necessary. But a metaphysically necessary objective moral law code provides a lot less assumptions, and you don't have to smuggle in all kinds of bullshit concepts like the Trinity or why God thinks it's okay for women to be stoned for not bleeding. It's just a much simpler explanation for objective morals, I think. And Misinterpretations, welcome in. Thank you for being a member for 3 months. Misinterpretation says, hi, Justin. I've asked before, but will you talk about it more? Someone says the Bible has errors because it was written by fallible men. It's a good question. So the thing that I typically ask these people is, if the Bible has errors, then why would I trust it? And they might say, well, listen, you have to go through and determine what is the error and what is not the error, and accept the stuff that's true and accept the stuff discard the stuff that's not true. Okay, well, if that's the case, then I'm going to reject Jesus fulfilling prophecies. I'm going to reject creation. I'm going to reject Noah's flood. I'm going to reject God. Like, if it's just up to me to go through the Bible and say, well, the stuff that I prove is true, then shit, almost none of it's true. Almost the whole damn book is bullshit. So if that's the barrier that I have to cross over, is if it's true when it says it's true, then congratulations, you've just proved me right, which is that going through the Bible doesn't lead you to a God, because now we're just comparing it to real life and asking ourselves what matches real life, and a God doesn't actually match real life. I hope that answers your question, Misinterpretations. I appreciate the question, though, and thanks for being a member. And Nothing to Protect, thank you so much for the super thank you, big W. And 123 Berserker says, you think there is money incentive to be apologist? I don't know if there's a lot of financial incentives to be an apologist. I think most of them are pretty sincere. I think most of the financial incentives in Christianity is in preaching and in funding the cult. So that's why, like, the televangelists are there, and they're getting fake degrees. They're all going to like Christian Life University and getting fake degrees despite having no actual undergraduate education. They're getting fake PhDs. Kenneth Copeland has a PhD. Bullshit, he does. He purchased that for a couple $1,000s and claimed he did some schoolwork. He doesn't. And we've got others. The higher up you are on the televangelist food chain, the more fake your degree is. Now, the reason why these people fake degrees is because they're charlatans, and they know they're charlatans, but they're married to the money. The lower down on the apologetic food chain you go, I think the less likely it is that they are in it for the money, or else they would have just been they would have been doing what the televangelists do and preaching the prosperity gospel. Shit, Creflo Dollar at one point said that when he planted his church, he wished that there were sirens at the entrance. When you came in and you didn't pay your tithe, that sirens would go off, and then all the doors would lock, and then men would show up with AK rifles and shoot everybody who didn't pay the tithe because they were stealing from God. And then once they carried all the dead bodies out back, they would go ahead and have church, and God would actually bless the church service because all the heretics were dead. That's the kind of bullshit depravity you get from these supposed PhD holding Christians at the televangelist level. It's the craziest bullshit on the planet. But do apologetics have a lot of financial incentive? Sometimes. Only if you get really big, like you get really good at it, like Wes Huff. But I don't think Wes Huff is getting paid all that much, and I do personally think that Wes Huff is sincere. I don't think he's a fake. Rochelle, thank you for the super chat, says, was historic Paul really a priest or even a Jew? Here's my opinion. I think, fuck no. I don't think historical Paul certainly wasn't a Pharisee of Pharisees. He misquoted the New Testament. In fact, in Corinthians, he misquotes the number of people that were killed in the book of Numbers, when I think how many thousands of people died? 14,000 people died in the book of Numbers. Now I got to get the contradiction. Where was it? And then there's other stuff that Paul gets wrong as well. Like he talks about the law code being temporary. Well, no, it's not. Not even close. If he knew anything about the book of Deuteronomy, he would know that the law was permanent and that God intended, even in the new covenant era, that they would be following the law. In fact, before we read that, let me take you to Deuteronomy 30. And shit, what verse did I want? Was it 30:11? Now I got to find 38, 9, 10. There's a passage in Deuteronomy that talks about this idyllic end period when Israel is finally in the ideal state and God has finally circumcised their heart and not just their flesh. You know what I mean? It was verse 8. Well, let's do 30, and we're going to do 7 through 9. Oops, I got to get a comment in here. There we go. So in Deuteronomy, it says, let me clear this. I apologize. So we can read this. It says, then the Lord your God will put all these curses on your enemies and on the adversaries who took advantage of you. Then you shall again obey the Lord, observing all of his commandments that I am commanding you today. And the Lord your God will make you abundantly prosperous in all of your undertakings, so on and so forth. It's going to be the ideal world, right? Well, in the ideal world, the reason why he lists in verse 6, I believe, the circumcision of the heart, he says, God will circumcise your heart, not your flesh, right? What Jeremiah said, what Ezekiel 44 said in the New Jerusalem. He's doing it so that you'll follow the commandments that Moses gave in Deuteronomy. So this idea that God intended for the law to go away with in the New Jerusalem is absolute bullshit. Paul did not know his Old Testament. He was a liar and a fraud, just like Jesus. And then even quoting simple stories, like in 1 Corinthians 10:8 says we must not engage in sexual immorality as some did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. That story comes from the book of Numbers, and it says, I believe 24,000 actually fell that day. It says, nevertheless, those who died by the plague were 24,000. So like Paul just, every time Paul talks about the Old Testament, he flubs it. He gets it wrong because he didn't actually know the Old Testament. And he says in Acts, I think Acts 22, Paul says that he gets papers from the Sanhedrin to go out and round up these Christians and bring them to justice. Let me see if that was the right one. Let's see. Blah, 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 blah. Let's see what it says. Might be at the beginning. It says, I am a Jew born in Tarsus, blah, 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 blah. There we go. Yep, there we go. It says, I persecuted this way up to the point of death by binding both men and women and putting them to death. As the high priest and the whole council of elders can testify about me. From them, I also received letters to the brothers in Damascus, and I went there in order to bind those who were there and to bring them back to Jerusalem for punishment. Now, I would expect that if he was this close with the council in Jerusalem, and he was getting actual papers from them to go out and round up and get these Christians, that we would find something of that nature in the writings of the Sanhedrin. We've got like 100 tractates, 100 sections of the tractate of Sanhedrin, referring to how Jesus was killed, how his disciples were killed, what happened to James, what happened to John the Baptist. Funny, not a single word is mentioned about Paul or about giving anyone permission to go round up these Christians and bring them to justice. That doesn't occur in the writings of the Sanhedrin. I don't know what we read about Paul. I don't even know if all the letters of Paul were even written by Paul. We know some of the letters of Paul weren't authentic. How far does that go back? Anyways, no, to answer your question, Paul certainly, I don't think was a Pharisee. Sure as fuck wasn't a priest. And was he a Jew? Maybe, but it wasn't a good one. Timothy, thank you for the super chat. It says, learning geology in college led me to realize the flood was not real, and ultimately my deconstruction. I was saved by Doug. Hail Doug, the god of geology. Yeah, the crazy thing about the flood is that the geological record disagrees so heavily with the biblical flood that it's hard to imagine why Christians think that geology is always a good argument for the flood. They always go to geology and it never supports it. But anyways, it is what it is. What are you going to do? And Reverend Ricky Skay, it's good to see you tonight. I appreciate the question. He says, no questions. Oh, I appreciate the super chat. He says, no questions. I already know everything about religion. FYI, it's fake. We agree. Just showing support. Praise Doug. Well, Ricky, thank you so much for stopping by and showing some support. Really appreciate the support. And another question from Superhuman says, is it fair to say the Bible never outlaws polygamy? I asked this to my pastor once, and he only gave one scripture which forbids it for bishops. Here's the thing. Here's the thing, Superhuman. It never, not once does it condemn polygamy. And even the, hold on. The passage that you're referring to in 1 Timothy doesn't really say what people want it to say. It seems to be, it could actually read in 1 Timothy chapter 3, someone who's never been divorced, meaning they've only been married once. It doesn't have to read that they've only had one wife. There's some ongoing debate in scholarly circles about what is actually meant in First Timothy, right? So I'm not a Greek expert, right? So and I make it clear that I specialized in the Old Testament and in the Semitic languages. So I don't pretend to be an expert in Greek. That being said, there's a passage that refers to only having one wife that I think is a little bit ambiguous. Let me grab it real quick. 1 Timothy 3:2, I believe, is one we're looking for. And the NRSV says of the bishops, a bishop must be above reproach, married only once. See what the NRSV does to it? The NRSV says married only once. Temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, and an apt teacher, not a drunkard, not violent but gentle. So this is a really interesting ongoing debate, is whether or not 1 Timothy ever actually condemned polygamy, or whether or not it's just condemning getting married once. Now we know from the evidence of the New Testament that they didn't believe in divorcing and remarrying. And Jesus himself says that anyone who divorces and remarries for anything other than infidelity is committing adultery. So this would seem to agree with the words of Jesus. And I don't think most of the study Bibles are actually going to address why they translate this in the NRSV the way that they did. Mine doesn't. But anyways, the long and short of it is, there is, I think the best interpretation of this is that it's just prohibiting people from getting remarried, like it said elsewhere. And there are multiple passages in the Bible that are okay with getting multiple wives. In fact, Exodus 21, the famous slave passage, talks about, hey, what to do if you have multiple wives, right? So if you go to verse, was it 11? Where is it? No, not 11. There we go, verse 10. It says, if he takes another wife to himself, he shall not diminish the food, clothing, or marital rights of his first wife. So God is saying, listen, if you take a second wife, make sure you treat her the same as your first wife. If God was against polygamy, he should have said, don't take a second wife, but he didn't say that. So good question, though. Good question. And JJ says, heard a pastor say the prophecy of Zechariah 9:9 was what we wanted, and what Jesus did in Matthew 21:5 was what we needed. Oh, that's the worst hermeneutic I've ever heard for Zechariah 9:9. Wow. Wow, a pastor said that? I want to make sure you guys understand the dishonesty of what this pastor is saying. So, in Zechariah 9:9, the prophet, supposedly speaking for God, tells you what to expect, right? And it says, rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion, shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem, see your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he, humble, riding on a donkey, on a colt the foal of a donkey. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he will command peace to the nations. What this pastor is saying is that the prophet told you that what you should be looking for is a victorious king who defeats all of the enemies of Israel. And he's saying, but that's not what you actually need. That's just what you want. What you need is what Jesus did. But Jesus didn't do shit. I rode a donkey. I'm not the Messiah. Jesus didn't do a damn thing. What they needed was to be delivered from the hands of their enemies, which is why Luke chapter 1 comments on this. Luke chapter 1 envisioned Jesus delivering them from their enemies. In fact, the prophecy given about Jesus from his uncle makes this very clear. Says, blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he has looked favorably upon his people, and he has redeemed them. He has raised up a mighty Savior for us in the house of his child David, as he spoke through the mouth of his holy prophets of old, that we would be saved from our enemies and from the hands of all who hate us. And why in the world would God save them from the hands of their enemies? That we, being rescued from the hands of our enemies, might serve him without fear. That was the promise made by the prophets, that they would be rescued from the hands of their enemies. And that prophecy did not come true because Jesus is not the Messiah. And also because the God doesn't exist. But thank you for the super chat. That was really interesting that a pastor would say something so silly. Well, I guess I should expect it. Blessed Goku asks, an NPC by the name of Jesus Christ, your father, came to my chat and told me I was going to hell for not believing. I told him I believe in Doug. They ran. They know. They're flaccid and they know they're going to get rocked by Doug. They can't stand. They quake. They quake in the presence of Doug because no one can be as rock hard as Doug, but we can certainly try to never be flaccid for Doug. Big W, Blessed Goku, for vanquishing the heathens that are talking ill of you because they don't believe in the rock hard Doug. Hand of Omega says, I really appreciate your learning, but why don't you actually have some kind of job in religion, not counting this? Not all teachers are believers. Well, here's why. Because I have a background in electrical engineering and it pays well. That being said, I am going to finish my PhD, go back to school and start my PhD and get that out of the way. Once I do finish my PhD, I will go into teaching this kind of a thing as like a career choice. That being said, my personal belief is that if you're going to teach professionally in an academic setting, you should have your PhD. That's just all there is to it. Listen, I can get online and I can teach you guys because I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, which is most than what most people have. But I would never dream of stepping into a college campus and pretending to teach people as though I had a PhD, because I don't. And let me tell you guys, for those who aren't familiar with academia, getting a master's degree and getting a PhD are not the same things. They're entirely different levels of academic rigor and study, and one is very highly concentrated, and you'll be an expert on a very specific field of study once you finish your PhD. So I don't even refer to myself as a scholar because I don't think scholars... I think scholars technically could fit that definition as long as you have some education, but I personally refer to scholars as people with PhDs. So that's why I don't do this professionally, is because I don't need to. I have a background in engineering. Meg, thank you for the question and for the super chat. It says, if the Bible is against bestiality and homosexuality, why is Adam picking out animals as partner, and men of the village want to screw men at the Levite's house? So you're referring to Genesis 2 and Judges chapter 19. I would say also Genesis chapter 19 as well. But this is a good contradiction. In fact, I brought this up today on the Atheist Experience because in Genesis chapter 2, God creates all the animals and then has Adam name all the animals and then has Adam look for a suitable helpmate among the animals, and he doesn't find one. It's not until we're told that Adam was unable to find a suitable companion among the animals that God's like, well, shit, I guess I'll make a woman. But presumably before that point, he had a penis. He was looking for a companion. What did God expect him to do with that? What was the expectation there? I can only assume that the expectation was that he was supposed to use the animal the same way he used the woman as a mate. That's the way it reads to me. I agree with you, Mag. It says, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner. Okay, cool. Right? So out of the ground, the Lord God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called them, every living creature, that was its name. And the man gave names to all the cattle and to the birds of the air and to every animal of the field. But for the man, there was not found a helper as his partner. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept, and then he made Adam, right? So God, first of all, is not all-knowing. He thinks that he's going to create animals and they will serve as an appropriate helper. It's not until Adam doesn't find a helper that he's like, oh, fuck, we need a contingency plan. And then he creates woman. So not only is God not all-knowing in Genesis chapter 2, he thinks it's okay for man to put his wuhong dilly in the cha-cha of an animal. Great observation and great comment and question, Meg. I appreciate that. And Pimpin' Longbottom, Big W, thank you so much for supporting the channel with the $49.99 super chat. Let's get some W's from Pimpin' and supporting the channel. And Pimpin's got a long question. Let's see if we can grab this. It says, hello again, Justin. My friend keeps telling me I have a choice between believing in Jesus, despite me telling her belief aren't a choice. Is there anything else to say, or is it pointless? It's condescending as hell to hear that it's still my fault. Great question. Here's what I would do. Find a scenario that they can't choose to believe, and then ask them to believe in it. So typically, like if it's a guy, and I get the sense that the guy is a little homophobic, I'll say, can you choose to find me sexually attractive? And typically they'll say, no, I can't, because I'm not attracted to men. I said, does it matter? You can choose to find me attractive, because what you believe is just a matter of choice. And typically they'll never agree to it. And then you can say, there you go. You can't just believe anything you want to by force. You're either convinced of it or you're not. Or you could do something like, well, listen, can you believe right now, like say you're in a room with the person and the room's got blue walls. Say to yourself, can you believe that the walls are blue? Typically they would say, no, I'm looking at them. Can you believe that they're not blue? They're saying, no, I'm looking at them and they're clearly blue. I said, but can you force yourself to believe that they're not blue? And if they're honest, they'll say, no, I can't force myself to believe that they're not blue because I'm looking at the walls. So that's one way to do it. And then here's the other thing that you can do. And I like this one. I forget who, I heard a variant of this at one point, and I liked it so much that I kind of created another variant of it. But ask something like this. Can you choose to believe right now that you're the only person on earth? Can you do it? And the reason why this is such a good final boss question to ask is because there's a lot of implications that come along with believing that you're the only person on earth. So say, can you believe that there was a virus and everybody on earth died and you're the only one that's left? They might initially say, yeah, I can believe that. And then you say, okay, I challenge you to believe it. And you can call them out on their bullshittery, because if you truly believed that you were the last person on earth and everybody, literally everybody just died, then you would be in a fucking panic. You would be crying. You'd be a mess. You'd be weeping for your loved ones. You'd be terrified that your life would be in an utter disarray if you found out just now that you're the last person alive. So beyond a shadow of a doubt, you'll never be able to get a believer to believe that they are the last person on earth just by mere force. And when they try it, they'll figure out that they're uttering nonsense. So that's kind of how I would posit it. There are some Bible passages that you might be able to appeal to that get rid of free will. So there's a lot of passages like John 8:44, I believe, or 6:44. I always get the two of them mixed up. But in John 8:44, nope, I wanted 6:44. I knew I was gonna fuck it up, guys. I've been live too long today. My brain is starting to turn to mush. But Jesus says in John 6:44, no one can come to me unless drawn by the Father who sent me, and I will raise that person up on the last day. So it doesn't matter what you believe. You cannot come to the Father unless he already draws you to himself. It's right there in the book. Romans chapter 9, God created you to be a vessel of wrath if you don't believe. That's it. That's the end of it. But great question. And Pimpin', I know it's very frustrating for people to sit there and say, it's your fault that you don't believe. But those are the challenges I would give them that I think would get them to a healthier position. Amir, thank you so much for the $20 super chat. Big W for supporting the channel. And let's see the question. Brought up the irony of the conclave being so political when it should be divinely inspired. Is it a good argument against the Catholic Church? Shouldn't all bishops just get the same message, like make Keith the next pope? Listen, I think it is a great argument, and I think the best argument that we have against this, if we go to Acts of the Apostles, and was it Acts chapter 4, maybe? Let me double check. I always forget which chapter the newest disciple was. Right at the beginning, Acts chapter 1. Check out how they choose who is going to be the newest disciple to replace Judas, because they were adamant that they got to have 12. You got to have that round number, right? It says, then they prayed and said, Lord, you know everyone's heart. Show us which one of these two you have chosen. So they're choosing between two people to fill the position of Judas, right? It says, to take the place in this ministry and apostleship from which Judas turned aside to go to his own place. And they cast lots for them, and the lot fell on Matthias, and he was added to the 12 apostles. If they really, truly believed that God is true and present and active in the community, then they should have done exactly what the disciples did. Because remember, the Catholic Church claims to have apostolic succession. They are the successors of the apostles, which means they should be using the same practices as the apostles to determine who the leaders are going to be. They should be casting lots. Amir, you have a rock solid case against the Catholic Church, and Acts chapter 1, the very last paragraph, solidifies your case as being rock solid as Doug. If they're going to depend on God to select a new leader, they should not be counting on the power of consensus. They should be counting on the power of casting lots, which is, again, in the Old Testament, how God tells you to settle these things. So great question, Amir. I love it. Young Black Economist, thank you for the question, says, America got rich from slavery justified by religion. There's more historical reasons than what remain today to profit from this mindset, in my opinion. You're 100% right? America did get rich on slavery. Now, the tradition has been that no. It was the Protestant work ethic that led to the prosperity. Bullshit it was. It was not. The wealth that we got came by extorting the lowest person in the power structure, That's how we got these riches. That's how we got the cotton money. That's how we got the sugar money. That's how we got to where we're at, because we extorted the lowest people on the totem pole that couldn't defend themselves, and we made it an art form. We were just the best at it. That's how we got here. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And Chip, thank you. Shit, they built the White House, guys. Anyways, I can go on and on. Chip, thank you for the super chat. It says, any suggestions on how to respond to a friend who recognizes many problems with the Bible and Christianity, but says he just wants to believe anyways? So I would ask him this. If the Bible doesn't need to be true for you to believe it, if the religion doesn't need to make sense for you to believe it, why are you choosing to believe in Christianity versus Islam? Why are you choosing something that has no evidence for it rather than another thing that doesn't have evidence for it, right? If we're just choosing to believe something, whether there's evidence for it or not, what is leading you to believe in the thing that you're choosing to believe in? And if that's the case, if it's rational to just believe in something because you want to believe in it, then would it be rational for me to say, listen, I just believe in a God that says it's okay to murder people that believe in your God? Would that be a rational thing to believe in? Inevitably, they're going to say no, because that at some point, the rubber of what you believe needs to hit the road of should you believe it, and is there a good reason to believe it? And I think that is where you would get the best pushback, is say, okay, if we can just believe it because we want to believe it, then let's push the logical limit. Is it okay for me to believe X, Y, and Z, and just list whatever horrific shit you want to list after that? And then they're going to say, no, you shouldn't believe in that just because you want to. And then you actually have some dialogue opening up. That's how I would do it, Chip, but you might get some better answers from the chat. And Fancy, welcome to the Kraken Crew Elite. Fancy, don't let me down. Although you don't get just one chance. And Hand of Omega, again, with the super chat, thank you so much, says, please tell us more about the schools that give fake Bible degrees. Is there a list of names to look out for? There is, and I have a list of them, again, on my old website. And I don't publish my old website because here's the thing. I'm busy moving a lot of the content from my old website to my new website that is thoroughly atheistic. My old website, I still have content on there from when I was in seminary. I've been writing on this website for years, and I don't want to flood the website with atheists that are leaving nasty comments on all the Christian comments and start this internal war. What I'm going to do is transfer all the content over to my new website as best as possible, and then quietly wind down my old website without creating a feud. I don't want to create a feud between the Christians that like the believers that like my old website and the atheists that follow me now. But yeah, there is a list. I'll publish it on the Deconstruction cheat sheet. Send me a message on Discord to remind me. I have a huge list of all the diploma mills, and I have a running list, a canonical list of pastors with fake degrees, where they got their fake degrees from, and whether or not they had any legitimate education prior to their fake PhD. And it's up to like 175 people. It's a huge, huge list. I'll add both of those lists to the Deconstruction cheat sheet so that we have access to that. But yeah, I do have a list. I'm sorry, Hand of Omega, that it's not currently published on my website or on the cheat sheet. I just started adding content to my Deconstruction Zone website this week, and I'll be updating it with a bunch more stuff. But send me a DM. Anyone who's curious about my old website and want to read the content on it, I'm more than welcome to share it with you. I just don't want to create a war between the people who follow me here and the people who used to follow me over there, because I don't want it to be a place where people are just endlessly arguing with each other. I think we already have enough places for that. But let me grab the next one. Let me see here. I can never pronounce this name, and I apologize for it, but Epifanio, let me know if I got that right, says, shorter name this time. There we go. That's why I pronounced it this time. Epifanio says, shorter name this time. Stoner rock is Doug's music. Hell yeah, it is. If Doug likes any genre of music, it's going to be like Pink Floyd or something in that vein. Shit, maybe the Doors. Definitely the Doors. You know Doug loves some of the Doors. In fact, he even acts as the doorstop. Yeah, because he's a Stone. So big W there. I agree. And Ray, with a question, thank you so much, says, what do you think about the series of claims that Christian holidays and saints are stolen from pagan traditions? I'm heavily skeptical, but would love to hear from the son of Doug himself. Good question. So here's kind of my opinion is I don't think they stole necessarily the traditions. So what happened was the spread of Christianity in Europe wasn't as quick as most people realized. It was slow, right? They took over a section here. They took over a section there. And they had these Christian holidays and they said, listen, now that you're part of the Christian kingdom, here are the days you have to celebrate. Here are the celebrations that you're required to keep. And what happened was you got natives and they're like, well, listen, I'm not just going to abandon my old traditions and celebrate your new traditions. And it happened to be a lot of the new traditions fell on the same timelines as the old traditions. And so they just said, well, shit, I'll celebrate your holiday and I'm going to celebrate mine too. I'm going to celebrate both of those fucking things. And so what you found is a lot of people started celebrating like Easter. Easter was, a Christianized form of Pesach or the Passover that they incorporated Germanic traditions into. And if you believe the writings of the Honorable Bede from the 9th century, he believes that the Easter tradition came from the goddess Ostra, which is where it gets its title from. And they mixed some of the religion of Ostra in with the Easter, with Passover, the Christian version of Passover. And that's how we kind of get this combination. And to be sure, just so we're all clear here, guys, I want to say this unequivocally. Easter doesn't have a damn thing to do with Ishtar. There is no connection with the ancient Babylonian Assyrian goddess Ishtar, also known as Inanna or Astarte, and Easter. No connection whatsoever. Ostra, however, the Germanic deity, does have a connection. That's probably where we get the name Easter from. It's just mere coincidence that Ishtar sounds like Easter. But this is another document that I need to add to the cheat sheet. I wrote an article years ago. I went through, I'm not joking, guys, I went through every extant reference to Ishtar in the ancient world. Hundreds of them. And I documented every symbol and every date that was important to the deity in that text. And not a single date, not a single celebration, not a single symbol had even one iota of crossover with the Easter celebration. Because she has nothing to do with Easter. Her feast day is in the fall. She's a harvest time celebration, nothing to do with Easter. Anyways, I'll get that data out there as well. 123 asks, opinion on Dan McClellan. Is he reliable? I think he's very reliable. He's a great scholar. You'll find very, very rarely do I ever find disagreement with Dan McClellan. I don't know. It's hard for me to find something I disagree with him on. And here's why. Dan McClellan and I have the same approach to biblical topics. We're acquainted with the academic literature, and we generally say the consensus in the academic literature is probably the best position to hold. And so I typically appeal to the modern consensus in the literature, and so does Dan, right? And so because both of us are typically appealing to this consensus in the literature, both of us are typically coming to similar conclusions, and that's why we typically agree on stuff. But is Dan a great resource? Hell yeah, he is. Dan's an amazing resource. I highly recommend Dan McClellan's work. The only time I ever heard him say something that I really didn't like was when he started to poo-poo on stylometric analysis. I know it's a new study in terms of computer science, but it's been around for a bit before computers. They were doing it by hand Styrometric analysis shouldn't be completely shoved to the side. I think it's a really good science that we should be using to determine authorship of manuscripts. In fact, the manual styrometric analysis has been done on the Dead Sea Scrolls for many years, which is why so many scholars actually believe that they can pinpoint individual authors and voices and compilers in the Dead Sea Scrolls using styrometric analysis the old school way. Not just, anyways, it's a lot to it. That's the only time I've heard him say something that I felt was a little bit disappointing, because I thought, well, maybe you didn't have to poo-poo on styrometric analysis so much. Yes, it's new in the way we're using it. Does it need to be proven a little bit more? Maybe, but we've actually been using it for a little while. We've gotten some pretty good results with it. And Chris, thank you so much for the super thanks. And iReactor, also, guys, we're getting close to 10 o'clock. I got to call it quits around 10. So no, if your questions are in, get them in, and then we gotta end the questions. So I'm not here till midnight. But I love question and answer, but I've got a long day tomorrow, and I can't stay up to midnight like a debate night. But thank you so much for all the questions. I'm going to answer all the ones that we have here so far. And iReactor says, also W666, why do Christians dislike Paul so much? To this never Christian, Paul seems to be an internally consistent theological response to the insane Old Testament. I got things to say about that. The problem is that Paul is internally consistent with what he believes, other than, I think the one thing I would call him out on is he goes on to say that salvation is by faith alone. In fact, he even goes on to say, if you take on circumcision, Christ is of no use for you. In fact, he says in Galatians 2:16, maybe? Let me grab Galatians chapter 2. There's a really interesting passage here where he says, we have come to believe in Christ Jesus so that we might be justified by the faith of Christ and not by doing the works of the law, because no one will be justified by the works of the law. But in our effort to be justified in Christ, we ourselves have been found to be sinners. Is Christ then a servant to sin? Certainly not. But if I build, listen to this, if I build up again the very things that I once tore down, then I demonstrate that I am a transgressor. Let's get to the part. 21 is where he finishes his statement, and he says, I do not nullify the grace of God, for if righteousness comes through the law, then Christ died for nothing. So he's essentially saying that if you could be righteous according to the law, then Jesus doesn't do anything for you. And I agree. He doesn't do a damn thing for you, because you can get forgiveness apart from Christ all throughout the Old Testament. Even when Jesus was alive, John the Baptist was forgiving people in the baptism of the remission of sins. Jesus wasn't there. He didn't die for anyone's sins. When the paralytic was lowered in, Jesus forgave their sins. He wasn't dead yet. Jesus even gave the disciples the ability to go out and forgive people's sins. So Jesus didn't have to die to forgive anyone's sins. Paul is just not consistent with this idea. And it gets worse, because if you go to Corinthians, he literally in chapter 6, we'll go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, he lists a whole bunch of stuff that if you do, you won't go to heaven. He says, do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Well, holy shit. You're saying in order to go to heaven, I can't be a wrongdoer? That's a work of the law, motherfucker. You're telling me that I'm not being judged by the law. I can't be righteous according to the law. It's only by faith alone. But then if I do all these things against the law, I'm going to hell? Well, shit, you just contradicted yourself, Paul. That's madness. So I don't know if Paul is entirely internally consistent, but he's certainly not consistent with the Old Testament. That being said, I think most Christians are following the teachings of Paul and not the teachings of Jesus. I think most Christians should be called Paulians and not Christians. And the reason why ex-Christians dislike Paul, like myself, is because we've seen how stupid Paul is. We've seen Paul contradicting himself. We've seen Paul contradicting Jesus. We see Paul contradicting the Old Testament. And we see Paul saying that not only are people going to hell, but God predestined us to go there. The most horrific doctrine in all of the New Testament. I think that's why we pick on Paul so much. But good question. I appreciate that. And Abraham the Chaldean, still love the name. Thank you so much for the question. It says, love the Q&A. DZ community asks better questions than Christians. Do you think Deuteronomy was written as a justification for reforms, standardization? 1,000,000% agree that we ask way better questions than Christians because we've read the book, and that's why we're deconstructing. And was Deuteronomy written as a reform? Fuck yes. Listen, Deuteronomy was written for the reforms under the reign of Josiah, which is why in his reign, they magically found this book. And then, interestingly enough, this prophet who was really close to the king vouched for its sanctity. Wow, isn't that a fucking coincidence that we got this book of Deuteronomy that's this lost book of the law? And if you compare Deuteronomy to the book of Exodus and Leviticus, they don't even always agree. Deuteronomy can't even agree on why the Sabbath day is the Sabbath day. I think in Deuteronomy, is it chapter 15? Says that the Sabbath day is to be practiced because of their coming out of the land of Egypt. A completely different a justification for the Sabbath than what we find in the creation narrative, which is wild that it would even posit that, right? Says, in remembering the Sabbath day, and Chet, thanks for bringing this up lately. It says, remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you, for this is the reason I lay this command on you today, referring to obeying the Sabbath. He's saying because you served as slaves and you should rest now that you're free. So take 1 day a week and rest. You know what it was like to be slaves. So I don't know. It seems to be that they're doing reforms. And they're doing explanations too, right? So, for example, Exodus 21 famously says that a woman can't go free. A Hebrew woman shouldn't go free in the 7th year. But in Deuteronomy, it says of the slave that they can go free. Both male and female Hebrews can go free in the 7th year. So it's revising the law and it's updating the law. Well, if the law of God was eternal and it's consistent, it shouldn't be contradicted by the law of Deuteronomy. But that being said, yeah, my opinion is that the Deuteronomistic code was written later than the rest of the legal code, which is why it's different. That's why it's saying things that aren't said. Like, for example, in parts of the other sections of Exodus and Leviticus, you kind of get this tone of like, hey, here's the things that you should do once you build the tabernacle, right? But in Deuteronomy, everything's about the temple. It's talking as though the temple already existed. But when Moses existed, there's no temple. That's ridiculous. And it's talking as though the people are going to be traveling from far away to the temple, which we had no understanding of that at the time of Deuteronomy, time of Moses, that there was going to be a single temple and everyone's going to have to go there. We don't really get that feeling. But anyways, yeah, I agree. Listen, Deuteronomy was written late, 100%. And Chris Ellion, thank you for the super thanks. I appreciate that. And Hand of Omega again says, t-shirt idea. I love a good t-shirt idea. It says, I went to the deconstruction zone and all I got was cooked. Crystal and Benny, if you're paying attention, if you're seeing this, we need that t-shirt in the Deconstruction Junction Discord gift shop. We need that t-shirt. Definitely. I like that t-shirt. I appreciate that. Big W for that suggestion. And Johannes with the super chat, thank you so much, says America now runs on slavery 2.0 corporatism. Yeah, you're not wrong. Corporatism really, like, the goal of the corporate people at the top is to take advantage of the people that have the least amount of power. That's why these Republicans want to get rid of the minimum wage. It's fucking crazy because they want to take advantage of the cheapest labor possible. They want to compete with China. Oh, Crystal's here. She said coming up. All right, I love it, Crystal. let me know when you get it ready. Post it to everybody in the Discord, and shit, I'll get a copy. Maybe we'll do some on a game night. We'll do some handouts. We're overdue for a game night. We haven't done Atheist Bingo or the Justify This game in a long time. Now Joel wants to do a game with me too, so we're gonna get that coming. Tyler, thank you for the 616. Hail Nero says, hey Justin, I forgot if I asked on Friday, but have you watched The Righteous Gemstones on HBO? It's a darkly hilarious comedy about a mega church. I haven't, and I love riffing on mega churches, actually. So now I need to watch it, now that you mention it. So it's an HBO original, so it's got to be good, and it's riffing on televangelists. So I'm on board. I'm going to jump in it feet first. Thank you so much for the recommendation, Tyler. I haven't seen it, but now I'm 1,000,000% going to go see it. Thank you for that. Listen, the deconstruction community is amazing. They bring new stuff to me all the time. I love it. Lamau says, does the New Testament or Old Testament ever actually teach free will? Not really. Not like you get, like there's a freedom of choice that's kind of buried in there. But it's in the earliest texts. In the texts that come later, so the problem we have is that in the earliest texts of the Old Testament, we have this idea of, God's going to judge you, and he's going to judge you because you have a choice to make, right? Now, the problem is all this horrific shit happens to Israel, and then they have to figure out how, why is this horrific stuff happening to us? And so they have this theology they build up of, no, this isn't happening on accident. This is meant to happen. God is still in control. Shit, God predestined all of this shit to happen. He knew it was going to happen because he predestined it, right? So when it looks like your God is failing you, then you have to go into cope mode and you have to say, no, this isn't a failure. This is on purpose. And let me tell you why it's on purpose, right? So to me, if you go to the early parts of the Bible, the stuff that was probably written, perhaps and edited before the Elohist got to it or the Yahwist got to it, I think there's a notion of freedom of choice. But the much later editors and redactors certainly would have got rid of that nonsense because they needed to justify their God getting his ass kicked all the time. And Randy, thank you so much for sending 5 Deconstruction Zone memberships. Big W, Randy. I appreciate that. And Rory, again, thank you for the super chat, says, was Saturn OG, god of Canaanites, Phoenician Hebrews before Babylon captives, and Star of Solomon David was a star of Saturn? First Sabbath is Saturday. So here's the deal. No. So the original days of the week in Hebrew don't match what they are today. They had different names for them. So Saturn didn't really play a role in it. So according to most archaeological data that we have, it seems to be that the Israelites were descendant of the Canaanites. They didn't come in and kill the Canaanites. They were Canaanites. And their God was El. You know him in the Bible as also Elohim, which is a concrete abstraction of El in the Semitic languages. So the high god of the early Israelites was El, which is why their name is Israel, which is why their primary cities are like Beth El. Beth El means the house of El, because they worshipped the high god El, and El had 70 sons and a couple daughters that were popular, like Anath. But famously, there were 70 sons of El. You had Baal. You had Yam, I believe, was one of the males, not one of the females. And you have a bunch of others. All this mythology in the Bible actually comes from Canaanite mythology. I would highly recommend the book called The Canaanites by Jonathan Tubb. He's a professor over in Oklahoma, I believe. Or I would recommend The History of Israel and Judea from the Old Testament library, or I would certainly recommend Unearthing the Bible by Israel Finkelstein, or any of the archaeological books written by William Devers, or anything written on the Canaanite mythology by John Day. All of them great resources that will help explain the kind of the mythological background of the Old Testament. Vara says, how to encounter the resurrection story, any reference? Oh, how to counter. Well, so typically what I would do is just tell them other resurrection accounts. So a lot of people believe that Dositheus resurrected from the dead, and he had a cult following for hundreds of years, but they don't believe that Dositheus resurrected from the dead. Book 4 of Herodotus's history talks about a guy named Aristeus that resurrected from the dead that appeared to many people, but you don't believe those witnesses, do you? There's lots of people that supposedly resurrected from the dead in the ancient world, and they don't believe in any of those people. The fact of the matter is there's special pleading for the resurrection of Jesus. I think the fact that the resurrection accounts, first of all, don't appear to be from eyewitnesses, and those gospel stories contradict each other, is a good reason to believe that they probably didn't happen. If God really cared about the resurrection of Jesus and cared to preserve the story, then I would expect that the stories would all be coherent and not contradictory. And then I would go through all the miracle claims that are listed in Tacitus and Suetonius and Livy and some of the other Roman historians and say, do you believe any of these miracles happen? They're going to say no. They're going to say no to all the other miracles and say, listen, if you don't believe that the Jewish mystic Hanina Bendoza was healing people, if you don't believe that Simon Bar Kokhba or Simon Bar Kosiva or any of the other Jewish mystics or any of the Roman healers, if you don't believe that any of those people were performing miracles, then why in the hell would I believe that the guy you like is performing these miracles? You're atheistic to all these other gods. I'm atheistic to them as well. Also to your God. I would apply the same level of critical thinking to your God. And Planet Peterson, good to see you, my friend. Thank you for the super chat. Says, Goddess Ostra comes from an 8th century monk named Betty. Yeah, we actually mentioned this. Says that's the only data that exists about it, has no known verified connection to anything. So that's why I said, if the Honorable Betty, as he's referred to, can be trusted, that's the best we have. We have, to be clear, we don't have any archaeological data, no textual data outside of Bede that the goddess Ostra actually existed. In fact, it's possible that the mythology of Ostra was developed after Bede said the shit that he said. That's certainly possible. So there's a lot of discussion about whether Ostra actually existed. I'm willing to trust Bede on this particular thing. That he's closer on the ground. He doesn't really have a reason to make it up. And being that people of the time period were willing to agree with him and adopt the mythology, then I'm kind of inclined to believe that he must have been saying something that was at least tangentially true, but he could be wrong, guys. Bede could be just as wrong as the people saying that it was about Ishtar. That's certainly a possibility. So it's a good point, though, Planet Peterson. We brought Bede up earlier, but you're right to point out that he could be wrong about what he said. He could be just as wrong as everybody else talking about Ishtar. And just 2 more super chats from Hold On, Is This Even Real? Great name. Thank you for the question. Says, what are your thoughts on natural morality that flows from believing we all come from one source, even if that source is a mindless Big Bang? So I talked about this earlier. Someone brought up the question about objective morals, right? I said, if you really want to believe in objective morals, you can just posit that there is a metaphysically necessary objective source to the morals that is not sentient. You can posit that. You can say it's true because it's metaphysically necessary, which is the exact same argument that pre-suppers are giving for their God when they engage in the moral argument. They're saying God is real because he's metaphysically necessary. Well, I can say, oh, shit, if all you need is metaphysical necessity for something to be real, then I'm going to posit a metaphysically necessary objective moral code that is just grounded in we'll say the whatever you want to call the singularity, or it's grounded in something that is non-tangible, but we know it exists because it's metaphysically necessary, but it's not sentient. It doesn't have desires or emotions. Shit, you could even say that it's grounded in the objective moral giving unicorn, and just say it exists because it's metaphysically necessary. And you have as much justification for making that claim as they do about their God. And Satan, again, good to see you tonight. Hail, Dark Lord. He says, hey, Justin, I on purpose put your live on volume to piss my family off, but now they think you're the Antichrist or his harbinger because you're very smart. Well, Satan, I appreciate you letting me your families listen to you, and if they think I'm the Antichrist, guess what? Man, wait until they read the literature from academia, because it can get pretty rough. But I'll take on that mantle. If I'm so good at deconverting that they think I'm the Antichrist, I think I'm doing a pretty good job. I appreciate the good word. And no more super chats, guys. Don't send any more. I gotta get off. But thank you so much for all the support and all the questions. I love the Q&A. Acme says the 13th Amendment allows slavery, forced labor. I know. Yep. Prison labor generates $1+ billion annually. 2024. There is a reason the slave states ratified it. I know. The big reason. Just to be clear, I don't believe in labor. I don't believe putting the prisoners to labor, and I certainly don't believe in the death penalty. I think we need to adopt a Nordic Scandinavian model where prison is actually a center for rehabilitation, not just for punishment, because a lot of these people ending up in prison could be rehabilitated and they could be placed back into society and be successful if we took those necessary steps. Not everybody, but a lot of them can. But when we put them in prison and we work them to death and we don't pay them for it, and we tell them that they're bad, horrible, evil people, they're not likely, and then bad shit happens to them while they're not likely to get reformed, and then we have to pay for them to be incarcerated the rest of their lives. It'd be much cheaper on society if we just did the rehabilitation work and got them back into society and made them a contributing member to society. That's my opinion. I could be wrong. Dr. Pizza says, how does three-phase power... Okay, but that's a very good question. So three-phase power is very interesting, and three-phase power is important because it's most helpful in evening out the dips. So the reason, where's my whiteboard? So the reason why three-phase power is so important is because, where's my marker going? There it is. Okay, so three-phase power fixes one of the problems that you have with single phase power and even dual phase power. And it's one of the things that really helps for induction motors to be as good as they really are. So three-phase power. So in a single phase sine wave of electricity, what you'll find is you've got a period where you've got positive and negative troughs in the power, right? Now, if you say, listen, I want power all the time, I want there to always be power, not a fluctuation of power, right? So what you do then is you're going to introduce a second wave. Now you've got more peaks, and so you're getting more of a defined characteristic to your stream. And then you can introduce introduce a third phase that makes it more of a solidified signal across. So it's a way of filling in the gaps of the signaling, but it also really helps a lot too with motors, right? Because you want to be able to hit the windings of the motor at continuous intervals that are consistent. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then you can have them interlaced, in many different ways. And so that's kind of what you need three-phase power for. That's kind of like why it has a life. How it works is another question that requires a longer explanation. Like, why it oscillates as opposed to a steady stream is a larger question. We can certainly get into it, but I think we'll lose most of the audience. If you have questions, though, Dr. Pizza, you're more than welcome to DM me. I love a good electrical question. Skeptics and Scoundrels, thank you so much, says, rock solid stream. Being with you all has so much sentimental value. Big W on the wordplay. Definitely something I won't take for granted. Never do. Never take it for granted. And Skeptics, we're so glad that you're with us. Thank you for being with us in all the streams and liking and supporting. And Zach, welcome to the Kraken Crew Elite. We appreciate the support. Big W. And 2 more super chats and I got to run, guys. Taco Joe says, Justin, you missed Paper Bag Man's super chat. Did I? Did I miss a super chat, Taco? Holy shit! Let me go through the list. My list usually is pretty good, and I don't miss anyone. Let me see where it's at. I don't know how I missed it. I thought I read this. It says, "Is it possible that things we think the Old Testament copied due to shit?" I didn't see this. Oh my God. I'm so sorry I didn't see this. I deeply apologize. I guess my list keeping wasn't very good. It sounds like a good question too. I'm sorry, Paper Bag Man. Please forgive me. I fucked up there. It says, is it possible that things we think the Old Testament copied due to the manuscripts being dated later than the other copied content actually did happen first, but was oral tradition until later written down? Noah's flood. So this is a really great question, and I agree with you. So I think when it comes to these mythological stories, all of them have a kernel of truth, right? They're reaching back to a time in history where something happened and it got passed down orally through history. And as it got passed down, the legend grew and grew and grew and got bigger and bigger. A great example of this is the many different recensions of the Gilgamesh story. You can see how the Gilgamesh story in the oldest Sumerian tablets was shorter, and then it got longer in the Babylonian period, and longer in the Assyrian period, and longer in the Neo-Babylonian period. It kept getting, because it kept adding to the mythology, right? And we find the same thing with the Old Testament. There probably were a bunch of Semitic-speaking people who came out of Egypt and dwelt in the land of Midian and picked up the worship of Yahweh from the Midianite priests and from their people, and then eventually gained a foothold in the Judean hills and became Judea, and then eventually supplanted the power, even overtaking the Israelites. And so, is there a kernel of truth to these stories that existed in oral tradition before they got written down? I think so, actually. I think there really is. And it's easy to look at the Exodus narrative and say, none of it happened, it's all made up. I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if it's 100% made up. I think what we've learned from history is that there was an event, and it was a small event, and it got blown out of proportion. This type of thing we see a lot in history. So that's kind of how I would feel about it. Noah's flood, there probably was a geographical flood. There seems to be evidence. Let me open the maps real quick. There seems to be evidence from archaeology that there was a massive, massive flood in the ancient Near East. I'm going to show it to you real quick. There's lots of data backing this up, especially for the Black Sea. So this riverbed going from the Black Sea all the way to the Persian Gulf seems to have been completely flooded at one point. A massive, massive flood all through this region here going to the Persian Gulf would have been huge. And there are even settlements below the Black Sea. We've dug up settlements where people used to live where the Black Sea is. So, the theory goes is that the flood was so bad at one point that the people living at the time felt like it was a worldwide flood, even though it wasn't. And then the legend grew into what actually was a worldwide flood. And so that's kind of what I think happened. I know a lot of Christian or ex-Christians get mad at me for saying that there's even a kernel of truth there. but I think there was a kernel of truth there. But again, that doesn't mean anything about their God. There's a lot of truth in the Babylonian histories. That doesn't mean I believe in Marduk. There's a lot of truth in the Egyptian history. That doesn't mean I believe in Osiris or Ra. That's ridiculous. But paper bag, I mean, it's a really good question. I appreciate the ask, and I'm sorry that it got missed in my list. My list doesn't manage very well sometimes, and eventually I'm going to miss something. I'm sorry that it was you. And Taco Joe, thank you so much for the reminder. I appreciate that. Last one from Saint Brush, thank you for the 666, is that Jesus requires the blood of the non-believers before the millennium age in Revelation, and that never seems to be brought up as part of the good news. Yeah, so the millennial reign in the book of Revelation is questionable to begin with, and it doesn't seem to match what we learn about it in Isaiah chapter 65. So it's weird to me. Yeah, I agree with you about the supposed millennial reign in Revelation requiring blood, although I think there's another way to read that other than that there's going to be a requirement of blood. Most Christians would say that like this is the requirement of blood is during the, not the millennial reign, but during the tribulation period. There we go. But here's what I believe, Saint. I think reading Revelation is generally a waste of time. It does nobody any good. There are so many other ways to disprove Christianity that trying to use Revelation to do it, I think, is boring and convoluted. But there are a lot of great academic commentaries on it. I like both of the latest editions of the Yale Anchor Bible Commentary series on the Book of Revelation. The prior one was written by Josephine Ford, and the newest one, I think, is by Kester. But both of them excellent. I haven't read the one by Kester, but he's amazing. Josephine Ford, amazing. If you want to read the book of Revelation, read a good academic commentary. Don't look at a pastor. But thank you for the question. It's a very good question. And with that, guys, I've got to get to bed and get some rest tonight. Thank you so much for spending time with me and for all the questions and all the support. If you're not in the Discord, join the Discord through the link tree in my bio. We'd love to see you there. And it looks like Crystal already put up the t-shirt that says, I debated Deconstruction Zone and all I got was cooked. I think that's what it says. It's already up there, so go to the Discord and find it. We really appreciate you guys. Thank you to the moderators that are here. And remember, support everybody else in the community. We got lots of people in the community to support, which reminds me, who's live right now that we can go raid?
With everything you've been told about your mind.
Let me see who's live right now. I'm going to find who's live. I hate this verification every time I log in. Blah, 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 blah.
Let me explain.
Okay, here's who's live. We got some people live here. Okay, interesting. A lot of believers. Here we go. We're going to go say hi to Dark Knight, okay? Let me put Dark Knight on the screen. So this is our friend Dark Knight. We got 70 people in the room already. We got to get this thing well over 100. So his handle is going to be Dark NYT or just NIGNYT. Let me zoom in. This is Dark Knight. Let's go give Dark Knight a hearty Doug and Justin raid. So he's asking Christians right now to justify the atrocities in the Bible, which I can't wait to hear happen. So let's go all raid Dark Knight. I see 73 people in there. We got to get this thing up over 100. I'll be there as soon as we get 100. I'll end the stream. I'll see you over there in Dark Knight's live stream. It's Dark NYT. Friend of the channel, great friend of the channel. Let's go ahead and give him a warm welcome. Let's see if I can see the comments. I see any comments coming in from Doug yet? All right, listen. I'll see you over there, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure you're following Dark Knight, and then we're going to go chirp at the Christians in his comments. He's not on YouTube. I apologize. He's only on TikTok right now. Oh, shit. I don't have TikTok open. That's sorry. He's not on YouTube. I apologize. Nobody's live right now on YouTube, are they? I'm sorry. I totally forgot I was only streaming to YouTube right now. And it doesn't look like a whole lot of anybody is live except for the line is live.
Roughly the 19th century, we can say. Okay.
We've got people live right now on the line, it looks like. Is that true? There we go.
Let's
just steal.
Guys, go over to the line right now and send them a Doug invasion. All hail Doug. Tell them that Doug sent you. Say, praise Doug. And I'll meet you over there. I'll go hang out with you over there. Big W. I've got the live stream open. It looks like Forrest is currently on there with a deer. So let's go over there and say hello from Deconstruction Zone and from Doug, the Rock of Salvation. And let's go show some support, guys. If you're not already following the line, I don't know why you're not. It's crazy that you wouldn't follow the line. Let's go rate them. Let's go rate them for Justin and Doug.